Welcome to Beyond the Walls, a podcast for women ready to break barriers and step boldly into their purpose. I'm Kylie, your coach and guide for overcoming fear, silencing self-doubt, and building a life of courage and connection. Whether faith is your anchor or you're still trying to figure it out, this is a space for growth, authenticity, and transformation. Subscribe now and let's start building the courage to be seen, heard, and unstoppable. This is Beyond the Walls, where your purpose begins. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so looking forward to this conversation. It is such an important one, and I feel like, at least for the last 10 years, I feel like it's been a buzzword. It's been a conversation worth trying to pursue and to have a lot more understanding and compassion over. And that is the conversation of grief. How do we even acknowledge it? How do we talk about it with others? I feel like as a society, we're at least trying to be better at it, right? We may still not know what to do with it, but I hope we're better at it. And today I have an expert in the field, as best as she can be, Tammy Fleming, who is a coach with grief recovery. And I am really looking forward to this conversation that we can have just to understand a little bit more and to help us to keep growing and going on the right track. So, Tammy, I would love for you to first you can just kind of introduce yourself, tell us your story, and maybe how did you used to view grief and how would you view it now? And I'm sure that'll kind of come out through your story as well. So
Sure.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kylie. It is great to be here. Thank you. And I appreciate your interest in the topic. At the Grief Recovery Institute, we all say nobody ever wakes up one morning and goes, I know what I want to do with my life. I want to help people with grief. It's not an attractive prospect, really, right?
Yeah.
So, and just to sort of correct the terminology, I'm actually a grief recovery method specialist, which is just to be, we have so many different words for that. So to be honest, coach is fair, but what I love about the particular method or modality that I work with grief recovery, it's really the person themselves that does the work. So I'm a griever just like everybody is. It's an educational program, not therapy. Which I guess coach is a good word, but the word we use is specialist. So subject matter expert, fair. I think grief is something now. It's funny now that, I've been kind of walking this path and involved in this training and talking to so many different people about it. It's impossible to unsee every single person, child, teenager, adult, certainly, grieves. It's a normal and natural part of life. But still, I think, and I think you're right to what you were saying, that we've gotten better. I think that's really true.
Yeah.
We have gotten better. It used to be, funny enough, kind of like nutrition. You know how I used to always think in high school, how come we don't have a nutrition course in high school? That seems like a no-brainer. It's so important to basic health.
Yeah.
Now a lot of high schools do have a really good nutrition course, right? So we've improved. And I think similarly with grief, a lot of medical professionals and even psychiatrists and psychologists did all of their training and never had a module in the past on grief. Well, that has, I think, changed. Which thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
However, there are still a lot of misconceptions out there. There's this sense of there are stages of grief. That's just an example of a misconception. Whereas that came from the research of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose research was about terminally ill patients. So yes, grief is involved, but there's an awful lot of kinds of different grief that doesn't have anything to do with a terminal illness.
Yeah.
And to bind the characteristics of a patient facing a terminal illness and then death, to bind that set of circumstances on everyone who has grief really does a disservice to people. So that is just an example. That myth persists. And there's some other ones that, I still hear it's, oh, grief is about, I don't need to grieve. No one's died. So that still is out there. But grief is normal and natural. And if anytime anyone has had a significant emotional loss, that is a grieving event. So anytime, if you think about it, you wish something significant, right, had been different or better or more. And wow, that just opens up, a whole galaxy of possibilities. And then you start to realize, wow, things like moving or even, we were talking about earlier before we got on here, we were talking about, having a child and being at home. Now, having a child is a joyful event.
Yeah.
But it's also a grieving event because I've lost my freedom. I've lost my self-determination. I'm now a milk machine. I have no energy for anything. When do I take a shower? I mean, right? I mean, it's a wonderful, joyful event. And there is also some things I wish were different or better or more. I have some things to grieve. So that's something that really kept me blind for a long time, was the fact if there was sort of conflicting things going on. I would focus on I should be just so happy because I have this whatever, I just graduated, or I have this child, or I just got married, or I just got this promotion, or whatever. I should, be so excited, but I'm not because of this thing. Oh, stop. Don't, I think that's so common for us, right?
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your distinction that you made in the beginning, so correct me if I heard you wrong, but I feel like almost like what I heard was that grief is not one size fits all. And if we keep trying to fit this one particular modality about grief, that makes complete sense why then we're so uncomfortable applying grief to a lot of scenarios where it does apply, because we're thinking it looks like, we're comparing and minimizing why it should or shouldn't count as grief, when it sounds like there's a lot of things can be labeled grief, but grief doesn't look the same way. The degree of grief isn't the same. And so maybe just hearing that, the freedom to let grief be individualized. There's some general principles about it. Yeah. But there's also a lot of everyone has their own experience with grief or how to heal through grief.
Totally. And it's really very frustrating to us as humans because you've probably heard someone, maybe to yourself, or maybe you've heard someone else, or maybe you said it, it's time to move on, right? Come on. It's long enough. Yeah. It's time to move on. And I remember being in I was speaking at an event and somebody asked a question and said, well, this happened to be a group of ministers and someone, full-time ministry people, someone stood up and said, well, when is it appropriate to tell someone enough? It's time to move on. And it was so hard. I mean, the answer to that is you don't get to say that. Yeah. You don't ever get to say that. And that's so hard, even as a parent, right? I mean, I think I did, I wish I had done my grief recovery training before I had teenagers, because I thought I was doing a good job for a while. I thought I was doing a good job of not shutting them down, right? And listening and having space for their, emotions. But I look back and I go, oh boy, I did not do a good job. I shut them down. Why? Because enough is enough. Move on now. Stop feeling that way. Yeah. And get over it. And I'll tell you something that's really interesting. I don't know if this is particularly where you want to go, but I think it's really significant. One of the things that I've learned that I had no idea about. So like many people, this minimizing thing, come on, get over it. Or, there's so much to be grateful for. Let's think about that. And
so much worse. Yeah.
It could be so much worse. And yes, it's true. And that's important. It's important to acknowledge that is true. However, not everything that is true is helpful or appropriate anytime, right? There's a certain, I don't know if you want to say an art to being compassionate or a skill.
Yeah.
And part of that involves not just telling or laying out the whole truth, right all at once. So that's, the thing that was so interesting to me and humiliating and humbling and necessary to learn was that, and I have to share this brief story about my daughter because she was really the one that enlightened me. And I wish I could say that I had completely understood when this conversation happened. But when she was a teenager, she was really, really worried about an event at school the next day, an audition, an exam. And I know perfectly well, she's a superstar. She's going to do great. Her teacher loves her, right? Like it's going to be fine.
Nothing to worry about.
Nothing to worry about. I knew enough to say, but she needs to express herself and I need to let her talk. I don't want to shut her down, telling myself. So I let her talk. I let her, we're driving home. We had a long drive home. And I literally let her talk, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And are you anything else? I don't want to shut you down. So is there anything else? And she's crying and lamenting and mourning and telling me all these things. And I'm so worried. And they're going to go terrible. And I'm so upset.
Yeah.
And I listened. And then when I was certain, because I asked her, is there anything else you want to share? Yeah. No. And then I launched into it's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. My cheerleader encouragement, which I thought is what I should do. I thought that's what I'm supposed to do. So I'm driving and I'm doing it's going to be awesome. And I'm casting this vision. You're going to, do great. It's going to be amazing. And I look over and she's sobbing. And I'm like, what happened? And she wails, "You never listened to me." And I was so shocked. I pulled the car over and I said, okay, I surrender. What is going on? I mean, what's wrong with you is what I'm thinking. What's the matter with you? You crazy kid. I'm here working hard to encourage you. She said something so profound to me through her tears. She said, "Mom, you are just uncomfortable with me being uncomfortable. This is about you. It's not about me." I was so shocked. I could not believe it. Now I wish I really had internalized that. It took me a while to get that, to really get that. But that was the first, I'll never forget it. That was the first sort of moment where I should have been listening more. And that lesson would come back to me over and over and over again. What she didn't, it's true. I wanted to fix her because I want you to be okay.
Yeah.
So still to this day, the first thing out of my mouth with her always is if everything's going to be okay, because it has to be. It matters so much to me that everything is okay with you. So it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. I think, in hearing that story, I can totally relate because I feel like it's a lesson that I've been having to learn the last couple of years is just how to be uncomfortable with other people's, or rather, how do I get comfortable sitting with someone who is uncomfortable, right? And that's such a confusing space because we don't want to leave them feeling sad forever. I think part of me is like, I want to leave them with hope as if like, is it a lack of faith that they're ever going to feel better again, right? Like, is it because it feels like, oh my gosh, they're going to be upset and devastated forever. How do we just sit and be on that journey with them, but still keeping hope that you're not supporting them to stay depressed, right? Like supporting them to stay grieved, which then probably boils into why we're like, it's been enough time, let's be happy again, right? Such a confusing.
I think we just don't know. There's two things going on, I think, with that. One is that we honestly, at least I didn't, we honestly don't know what is the right thing to do, what is really going to help. I really thought I was helping. And it was a shock to me to learn that's not helpful. That's not encouraging. I'm supposed to fix you. I'm supposed to be your cheerleader. That was revolutionary to me. I thought I'm supposed to be the comforter, the fixer with anyone, my friends. I'm supposed to come in and fix you. Well, that is a gigantic burden, actually. And to be honest, nobody can fix another person. I mean, there's always, yes, there's a place for offering support and advice and all of that. But I had no appreciation, and I'm not exaggerating. I really had no appreciation for the value of someone feeling pain. I think because my family of origin ran from anything unpleasant and painful. I mean, that's how I was trained. And I love them, and they're all very well-meaning. Yeah. But the way my family of origin dealt with anything unpleasant was it goes under the carpet. Yeah. You do not talk about it. You sweep it under the carpet and you avoid, and you don't mention it. Yeah. And so I learned that you avoid unpleasant things because you just do. That was so unhelpful. So I have been afraid my whole adult life until very recently. I'm 64, until probably 8 years ago, maybe. Yeah. I have been so afraid of negative news, bad news, negative feelings, bad feelings. I shouldn't feel this way. I'm not supposed to feel this way. It's not supposed to be this way. I should be grateful. I'm pped to be, and also the American culture is definitely, we value upbeat, I mean, that's it. I'm an American, so that's in me, right? Yeah. But the other thing I want to mention there is not just did we have the wrong kind of expectation, like I'm supposed to fix people. We're supposed to, be encouragers of each other, but make the world a better place, right? But I also did not appreciate the fact that because everyone, honestly, every living, breathing person has loss and has things to grieve. If we don't keep pace with that and process it well. So in other words, don't do what I did. What did I do? Anytime something bad or difficult happened to me, I stuffed it and focused on the good and focused on the silver lining. And yes, there's positive things in that. Yeah. It's not that it's entirely wrong, but I never, ever unpacked the pain, never, ever dared look in the face of it and learned anything from it. I just stuffed it and ran away. I had only one coping mechanism or tool, and that was under the rug, avoid, move on. Yeah. Well, what I didn't know is that stuff stacks up. Even the little things, the little, things that we go, oh, that's nothing. Yeah. That's a first world problem. Don't even mention it's nothing. Well, actually, what's true? I mean, what is your honest truth? If it bothers you or me, if it really bothers me, it is a thing. We have this analogy in the grief recovery method that it's a little silly, but it actually works. It works. If you imagine that we're born with a particular capacity, everybody's different, right? But everybody's born with a certain resilient capacity emotionally. And it's kind of like you can build it. Yeah. Depending on your family of origin, your environment, your experiences, everything. But everyone encounters loss and disappointment. It's just it's a natural part of life. Sometimes they're little, so they can be like little tiny pebbles or boulders, and we stick them in our backpack, our capacity, right? Stick them in there. Yeah. If we don't process them, a little boulder, or a little pebble, somebody snubbed me at the playground. All right. Yeah. It's a thing, but okay, I can, if I have that kind of personality, I can get over it. Well, if I have a different kind of personality, somebody snubs me at the playground, that's a huge thing. And I put that in my backpack and it's big. Yeah. And the thing I didn't appreciate is that those things accumulate. And so I know a lot of people that grow up, they never have, they don't experience the death of a loved one until they're well into their middle age. However, everybody experiences some kind of loss or disappointment. And so whether maybe you haven't had a gigantic big boulder that, your father died, your mother died, you were, raped or something. Maybe you don't have that huge thing there, but everyone has had a bunch of little, pebbles that depending on who you are, maybe they're not so little. And if you have enough of them, they make up a big boulder. Yeah. Yeah. And you can only carry so much. And so that's something that I did not appreciate. That that conversation with my daughter, what was going on there, she was absolutely right. I had no idea, but at the time that I was having that conversation with her, I'm in my middle 40s. What's in my backpack? I had stuffed the death of my father, the death of my mother, deaths of quite a few of my teenage friends growing up by drunk driving, suicide, disappearance, lost, mountain climbing, drowning, and then death by suicide in university, and then life goes on, then miscarriages, then loss of a friend, and you start, now you're in middle age and you start to pack it up. Grandparents die, and then best friends get divorced, and and then there's aging as you get into middle age, or loss of health, and you start to get loss of idealism. I'm in my middle 40s. I thought I would be, financially independent, or I thought I'd feel more in love, or I thought I'd be married by now, or I thought I'd have kids by now, or I thought my kids would be healthier or smarter, or something. And it's just not. And if we have not dealt with all of our stuff, when someone comes along with their pain, to your question, circling back, how do we show up for people when they're in pain? Sometimes we just can't, because we are full up to here.
Yeah.
This was me with my daughter. I had no idea that my backpack was up, digging into my shoulders, weighing me down. Yeah. I got no space. I cannot hold space for her pain. Yeah. As soon as she starts showing me pain, I'm like, stop it. Yeah. Stop it. Because I have so much myself. I just have no space. And that is one huge difference I've noticed in myself since I have, well, first of all, learned to have different expectations, but also taken down the temperature, gotten rid of some of these, little pebbles and these gigantic ones, and broken them down, and they're gone. Yeah. Now, they're just gone. So I have space now where I can, stuff that used to trigger me and send me, make me so incensed. And now it's, I still can judge, wow, I can have empathy, I can have compassion, I can feel with people, but it doesn't get inside of me and limit my life like it used to.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So a couple things that I was thinking while you were sharing that is that, one, I loved the analogy with the boulders. And to me, I saw, I think we kind of hinted at it, and we certainly were talking offline before we recorded about just the trap we all do to compare, right? We compare our grievances and then compete and then minimize. And I was like, wow, that totally explains why when, let's just use the playground analogy. Someone snubs me on the playground, tiny pebble. Someone snubs somebody else on the playground, giant boulder. So it makes sense why then if we keep putting on our own experiences onto other people.
Yes.
I'm looking at the giant boulder girl and saying, get over it. It's not a big deal. Right. And vice versa. Because then the person who has a giant boulder, when that happens, they're also coming to me, because I've had this experience too, where somebody else might be coming at me with some major compassion. And I'm like, I don't even need that level of, I'm not feeling as devastated as you are about this situation. Right. Kind of an opposite amount of grief, where you're like, should I be grieving more? Why are you reacting so strongly to this situation? It doesn't bother me. But what can always be true is that we both have giant bags full of boulders, whatever size, right? So you're almost like there's always a way to find at some point some compassion and some unity. We don't have to, I think that's one of the things that I love to talk about on this platform is when we get so caught up in the circumstances, you don't have to go through the exact same circumstances as me to understand betrayal, disappointment, letdown, right? It's kind of whatever it is that made up that boulder, but we can all relate to that particular boulder, right? Or the weight of it. No matter what size the rocks are, they can both weigh 10 pounds. We're both carrying 10 pounds around with us, right?
Yeah.
So I love that analogy and that visualization for us. So, and I'm curious, I would love to hear more then, wow, how did you go from that breakdown moment to where you are now? Because you just listed off a massive list of...
Oh, there's lots more.
Plus, people don't even know where you live most of the time right now in the country.
Yeah, I live in a war zone. I mean, yeah, it's
environment.
crazy.
So talk to us maybe like from that. I don't know if that was the day. Did it all start for you down the path of starting to even just acknowledge? Like, it sounds like you weren't really completely aware of the weight of your burdens.
Oh my goodness, not at all.
So how did that go?
Oh, my friend, I was such a slow learner. I regret to say. So briefly, this grief recovery was recommended to me by a friend, a wise older woman. We all need those people, wise older women, and also older women need wise young mentors too. We need both. But anyway, one of these wise older women had said to me at one point years ago, here's a great book you should read, and gave me the Grief Recovery Handbook. And I said, yeah, I should read that. And I did not. Again, because it's not attractive, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah, it'd be a good idea. It'd be a good idea. I don't really want to do that. And I didn't read it. And then several years later, I finally did pick up the book because I had moved, and it was my, I think, 6th transatlantic intercontinental moving house, which is very hard for me. I was leaving America, where I feel, kind of at home, and, the culture makes sense to me. I feel at ease generally, or I did. Moving to a place where that's not the case. And, got to learn the culture, and it was a new place. And anyway, I knew that I was sad about this move. But when I was taking on a new post in my job, and I felt like everybody around me was grieving. So I had enough sense to that was true, to know that, because there were all sorts of different faces of the grief, right? Like we were saying a little earlier, I thought people were in midlife crises. I thought I would be married by now, and I'm not. I thought, this and that. Yeah. Every single person, relationships broken, divorce, health loss, just disappointment. Yeah. And it was a depressed area. I mean, it was a tough place. So that's when I first sat down, and honestly, because I really wanted to learn for other people was the thing, which, okay, that's a lot of people are motivated that way. And yes, it did kind of open my eyes a little bit. What I wound up doing was, instead of trying to unpack this move, though that was a thing, what I wound up doing in the course of the modality that I practice, the grief recovery method, is an action program. It has a series. It's like walking a path, where there's certain steps you must take. So one of them is you have to take a little bit of time, sit down and reflect. Get yourself still and reflect on those what's in my backpack, basically. Yeah. What is in there? Which I had never in my whole life ever done. My job had been to ignore it. There's nothing in there. I'm good. I'm grateful. There's silver lining. All is, everything's good. No. So that was revolutionary, that just in itself, to take action by stopping and opening up the backpack and saying, oh, there's a little pet. Oh, there's a gigantic pet. Oh, I forgot about that one. And putting it all down on a piece of paper. And I realized when I did that every time a pebble or a rock or something came out that had something to do with my daughter, who was 18 at the time, I just burst into tears. And I thought, maybe that's what I need to really work on right now, is the move is real, but this is bigger. Yeah. So I basically, then you essentially unpack or process or complete. There's all kinds of different vocabulary you could use, but you process a relationship that's significant to you. Okay. From A to Z, from start to finish, the whole thing. Yeah. So I took my daughter, and it was revolutionary, because I would have said that, if you'd asked me, I would have said, well, we have a generally positive relationship. Well, when I looked at the picture on the paper that I create, no one's standing over me telling me what to do. This is just me and my heart allowing myself to be honest. Yeah. Right. there was a lot of negative in there. So it shocked me, the picture, when I looked at it. There was guilt and regret and shame and so much heavy negative stuff that I just had never. It's been in the backpack, stop it. Just get it out of sight as fast as possible, because that's how I was trained. It's unpleasant. So it was actually life-changing to do that. But then I told you I'm a really slow learner. I did that and it was very good. It improved our relationship. I felt lighter. I then started, recommending this book to everybody, but I did not walk that path again for almost 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And I regret that. That because I have a lot of significant relationships, and a lot of lost relationship. My parents, for one. Yeah. Well, I had never, ever had anyone sit me down and say, well, actually, I actually do think somebody tried once, and I rebuffed them because, no, I'm good. I don't need to go back and review that. Why would you do that? Everything's good. Yeah. You can't change the past. What's the point? Yeah. How wrong was I? Finally, I did sit down and walk that path with my relationship with my father, my relationship with my mother, and then a number of other people. And that started in about 2017. And then my son grew up and moved out, and I moved to Ukraine, where 2 years after we moved there, 4 years after we moved, no, 6 years after we moved, 6 years after we moved there, war is declared. Yeah. So, that was a new experience. Yeah. But it's interesting. I've said to some of my friends that there is some pain it's devastating. War, there's no words. And everybody has a different experience of it. Yeah. It's ongoing right now. My kids are sitting in it right now. When we're there, I just left there a couple of days ago. There's air raids all the time. People sit in bomb shelters. There's drones and missiles incoming, and it's dangerous, Yeah. People die. We go to funerals a lot. We help people in the hospitals who've lost both legs and arms, and 25-year-old with, both legs amputated above the knee. And what do you say? Yeah. And then you look at people who are suffering, and you just can't compare, but a horrible divorce. They're living in a beautiful house. There's no missiles falling. There's no air raid sirens. They're not fearing for their lives in that way. But which is worse? I don't think there's just no way to do that. And yet we do, right? We think we can minimize, compare, but it does not serve us. Yeah. Every pain that people have, it has to get processed. Otherwise, even if you and I might judge, oh, that's just a little boulder. That's a first world problem. That's not there are people starving, or there are people with missiles falling on their heads. This is nothing. No, it doesn't serve us, because that little unprocessed thing, I didn't get to go to the prom, is real for that moment. And you feel it, that person feels it 100%. And if it's not dealt with, it goes in the backpack and it sticks to everything else, and it affects everything else. And depending on who you are, it could be enormous. So, you just can't compare.
Yeah. Well, and as I'm hearing you share that, it makes me think about, probably just at the root, just how uncomfortable we are with being uncomfortable, right? Because even in the minimizing, that would be a convenient way for me to stop feeling uncomfortable, to justify for myself why my little T trauma isn't a big deal, right? Have you heard that expression before? The little T trauma versus the big trauma, right? If I can minimize it, we really do it a lot, probably only to ourselves, really. But I can imagine then, as a parent to a child, how easy it would be to minimize their pain, when really it is. How can you possibly, you don't even know what pain is yet, right? I'm just envisioning if you were
It's so true.
Like you weren't necessarily consciously aware when your daughter is pouring her life, like how easy the tape would be running in your mind of like, this is really minor compared to the things I've been through, right? And we're just so easy to be like, I don't understand how this could possibly be your problem.
Yeah.
But again, at the root, like, is that a big root of the grief recovery program of like just being comfortable, being uncomfortable? Like, does that play a significant role?
It does. It does. And even the value of the role of silence. You know, there's a beautiful little section in Winnie the Pooh, you know, in the big classic Winnie the Pooh. I don't know if anybody, you know, if any of your listeners still reads Winnie the Pooh, but I was just reminded of it the other day, where Eeyore, you know, Eeyore the donkey is this moaning, oh, you know, life is just terrible. Yeah. And his friends, Pooh and Piglet, hadn't seen him in a couple of days because he was depressed, and he was avoiding them because he was depressed. So they went round to his house and found him depressed. So he's no fun to be with, right? And that's what he said. He said, I'm no fun to be with right now. So I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want to bring you down. I didn't want to come be with you. So Pooh and Piglet go, oh, and they sit down in his house. And Eeyore's like, well, what are you doing? Yeah. And they said, well, we're just going to be with you. Exactly the right thing to do. I wish I had known this, you know, exactly the right thing to do. In ancient literature, in the Bible, Job, one of the oldest pieces of literature ever written, preserved for us, right? There's a scene in this, you know, he's a pretty famous figure that people are aware of, whether or not they're believers or not. You know, Job's the one who suffered. His whole life collapsed and his house fell in on him, and his kids were killed and all this stuff in a disaster and all this. And then he's physically ill, and his wife curses him, and he just says nothing. Everything's taken from him. But at the beginning, his three friends come and visit him, and in the beginning, they do exactly what Pooh and Piglet do. They sit down in the dirt with him, and they're silent for a week. That's the right thing to do. And everything goes south when they open their mouths and they try to fix him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Come on, get over it. Come on, let's go. Let's, enough. And you just can't do that with grief. And so I think there's lessons in all of that, that that is the right thing to do. And I think even as I say that, I know that if I were listening, I would go, oh, come on. You can't just let people, do this, and they will. Da, 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 da. And here's what I would say to my old self, because that's me too. I would say, how do you know? How are you so certain that it's going to be a bad thing if you let this run its course and you just sit and you respectfully hold space and listen? Yeah. Have you ever really tried that? Or I will just say, I'll speak for myself. There's fear in me. Well, what if, let's talk about kids, since we started with my kid. What if my kid becomes, just all, depressed and can't get out of it? Or what if they should be a different way, but they're not right now. That's not who they are. And it's not, I don't get to choose.
Yeah.
I'm actually making things worse by projecting my expectations of when and how you should feel better. Yeah. If they're not there. Yeah. If they're not there. And yes, maybe there's a case where people, and it happens, of course, a lot, people need professional help, need extra support, need to be, but those conversations have got to be separated out. I cannot, if someone's pouring their pain out to me, that's not the time. It's not an invitation to me to come and fix them and alleviate the suffering. But most of the time, the reason we want to do that is because we don't have space ourselves. Yeah. And so we just can't handle it. Yeah.
So what would be your advice? I love the analogy too, or the picture for Winnie the Pooh, like just sitting in that silence in the space. And I think probably to a married mother, we have to have the capacity ourselves, but then what a hard position to be in. How do you sit with your spouse? How do you sit with your kids when you're also entangled, your futures are entangled, right? Like I hear what I hear in yours, and you're giving great voice to those what ifs and really even the fears, right? Like our own awareness. Do I have the capacity to even sit in silence with them? Am I the one to do it? Do I have enough strength in me to be the one to sit with them? And two, how do I manage my own heart, my own fears, my own baggage at the same time when we're triggered to fear our future? Because it is our future, right? Like my husband's well-being and my children's well-being will impact my future, but it is also just as much like it's like the individual and the group, right? Like it is impacting the family, but the individual is really valuable. Kind of like what your daughter was able to give voice to, of like, it's her pain and her life she has to deal with, but we're
Yep.
impacting each other. So what would you say to that, or give us some hope? I hope there's hope in that.
There's tons of hope. It's so empowering actually to learn the skills of this kind of, empathy and compassion and emotional healing.
Yeah.
Which just to spell it out. I mean, I think that we all have a lot of personal work we have to do that isn't anybody else's burden or anybody else's fault.
Yeah.
If I'm triggered, it's very real, right? It's very, very real. We have to figure out how to manage ourselves, how to do our own emotional, personal work.
Yeah.
It's kind of like our own, I don't know, spiritual, emotional hygiene, I should say, because we tear our relationships are so important to our health and our well-being, the quality of our relationships. There's a study I've been reading lately, Harvard University is conducting still. They claim it's the longest ever study of human adult health and well-being ever done. Began in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken, and it's still ongoing. It's very rare to have a study like that from all angles: mental health, physical health, emotional health.
Wow.
And they had a control group, and then now they've got the kids, and then they've got the grandkids of these people. So incredible amount of data.
Wow.
Their number one conclusion: longevity and quality of life depends upon the quality of your relationships. If you have good, warm relationships, you live long and you're satisfied with your quality of life. Yeah. If you do not, and so many people we know, right, are estranged from their spouses, their kids, their parents, their sisters, their siblings, it's so common. Yeah. There's cancel culture now, right? Where we just cut each other off. And I'm not minimizing anyone's pain, or anything, but that's a huge loss, even if it's justified and you need to do that. There's so much grief when you cut off a key relationship like that, which is meant to sustain us. So learning how to learning the skills of really maintaining the quality of our close relationships is so important for ourselves and for one another. But it's so easy for us to just tear each other down.
Yeah.
So it's counterintuitive. And that's another thing this Harvard study came up with. One of the first things they said in their findings was human beings are notoriously terrible at knowing what is good for us. So this is a really good case in point. I'm a good example of that. I ran from processing my difficult emotions and pain because I did not know that it was good for me to do that.
Yeah.
I thought it was bad for me to do that. Oops, wrong. And so you had asked earlier, how do we hold space or deal with somebody when they're really in a bad place. And I do think we have to relearn that there's value in that, are we sure that it's going to lead to a bad place if they continue?
Yeah.
Or is this a necessary thing to give voice to their truth, voice their emotions, and then hopefully, and sometimes we need to help one another with this, lead them to a place of releasing it. And that's really the path, right? You reflect enough to know what's bothering you. You name it, not just the event, but the feeling. Lots of research, out there about the value of naming and identifying your feeling, your emotion.
Yeah.
You name it, it comes out of the darkness and into the light. You name it, it no longer has power over you. And you, using your words, you release your resentment. I forgive. I apologize. I let go. I'm walking away from this. I'm not going to carry this anymore. There's lots of ways to give voice.
Yeah.
But that's it. It's forgiveness, basically. I'm letting go of this thing. That's kind of the path.
Yeah.
Easy to say and really, really hard to walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I can relate to that so much. And at the same time, I feel like it is the blessing of longevity, right? Like we get to keep relearning this lesson and we get stronger and better at it, right? So I think
exactly.
even hearing, as much as we wish we could, oh my gosh, if I could start over as a parent today, right? Like how different it would go, but we can't do
better.
that. So that's almost probably something to grieve, right? Like just
It is.
accepting, like, right, accepting what is and what isn't of our situation. But I think in that, right, being able to separate out ourselves from other people, but also believing in our ability that we can change and we can grow. Even if it just means like the baby step of like the awareness, like, oh, okay, I'm actually, I'm avoiding uncomfortability. Okay, can I just get a little bit stronger at it? Can I sit for a little bit longer? Like, I don't know if they give any tools or like how practical you would get with it, of even just how can somebody even begin to baby step their way into it and begin to just become aware. Even I think, because some of the work that I've been able to do, it hasn't been centered on grief. And so I'm curious, even just in this conversation, I'm going to have to go and look into it more for myself. Right. But thinking through like, man, how we have grown, my capacity to sit in the uncomfortability has certainly grown. But a part of it has definitely been in the ability to separate out, this doesn't have anything to do with me.
Totally.
Right? It might be triggering something that is uncomfortable in me, but my teenage daughter, my husband, like their things, they're not really about me. It might be convenient to blame me for it, or I might have triggered it, right? But really, if we can separate out the difference between what somebody else is able to do and not able to do, right? Like there's so many layers to it. And I wonder if that's part of even why the comparing is so damaging, because we immediately take too much responsibility, right? Like, well, they're uncomfortable, therefore I did something wrong and I shouldn't do that again. And, we just put up all these walls just to avoid uncomfortability and then feel less than. Like if I were better, they would be able to grieve better, right? And again, that's probably going back into fixing each other, right? Where I'm taking on too much responsibility to fix the other person. So speak to me a little bit about that, of whatever that kind of.
Yeah. I really appreciate what you're thinking, the way you're thinking about it. And I do want to say real quick that, the grief recovery is not the only effective and reliable path to this. It is a good one.
Yeah.
It is a very good one. It is not the only reliable tool or instrument. If you have a really good therapist, some concepts from, say, family systems theory, or lots of other, even conflict resolution, nonviolent communication. There are so many fields of study that will raise our awareness and teach us these same principles, because I think this is our nature. It's how we are built.
Yeah.
And we do have to learn somehow. So it doesn't have to be grief recovery necessarily. But so it's interesting. There's a book I really want to read called Unoffendable. And I've heard great things about it, but I think that is the goal. I think, we don't want to be limited in our own well-being by being triggered all the time. Right.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can have that desire, and no amount of will or even understanding, I shouldn't, here we go again. I shouldn't, I should be able to handle this, but I can't.
Yeah.
Just knowing that isn't going to get me where I need to be, right? There is work I need to do. There's a path I need to walk. There are things I need to process. I could have the most wonderful desire to have tremendous capacity to, be empathetic and listening and compassionate and everything for people. But how we know so much today about how our brains, our nervous systems work. If we have been traumatized, big T or little t, and that is a habit our brains and our bodies have acquired. We've coped in a particular way. I can't will myself out of that. I'm going to have to retrain myself, create another neural pathway, which takes time and practice to do that. I can't just go, I'm going to do better. I'm going to, There's a really brilliant, I don't know if you've ever read Martha Beck, absolutely brilliant book called The Way of Integrity, which speaks to this, that she wrote. And she had a hilarious start of one of her chapters, which, because you have a lot of married women out there, I'll share this, is very funny. She said, if you here's an example, this idea of I'm just going to try harder. I'm going to will myself to do better with this. I'm not going to be affected. I'm not going to be triggered. I'm not going to, but if I just, wish myself there without doing this work to create the new neural pathways and have the new practice, which takes time. It's kind of like if you were a counselor and you had a married couple come in to your counseling session and they're having trouble in their physical relationship. You don't just tell the husband, well, whatever you're doing, do it harder.
Yeah.
That's the worst advice.
We would never do that. Yeah.
No, it's funny, right? It's just hilarious. But that's what we do to ourselves. At least I will say again, I'll use myself as an example. That's the only tool I had for it. Well, I'm going to try harder. I'm going to, I have to just be more grateful or be more patient or it's a great desire. Yeah. But if I'm completely weighed down with my boulders, no amount of, good will and willpower and, is going to get me there. I have to do the work to take down the temperature and to process.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I feel like that's something that, I feel like I've learned a lot this last year in a deeper way. I think is, because literally in my situation, I feel like my husband has had a very hard year and my daughter has had a very hard year, right? So I'm in my 40s with a teenage daughter, just like you were at one time, right? And it's such an interesting timing that I think God gave us, right? Where you've got this like puberty, hormone independent child, and we're entering perimenopause seasons maybe, or, we're both going through these significant emotional maturing stages, right? At the same time, that it brings out a lot of interesting things. Yes. So, but in it, right, I think just having to wrestle so much, like of just minding my own mind of what is me, what am I making it mean about me? What am I making it mean about these other people? Am I just fearful about what's my future and their future, going down paths of the what ifs, right? And being able to just keep it like, no, right now, what is happening? And being able to be okay for it to not be quick fixes. I think that's been probably the biggest lesson this year. I don't know that I want to call it patience, but it's almost like the long suffering, right? Yes. Like the ability to just be in a hard space. You don't know how long you're going to be there. And I can't rush it. I can't force it. I can't rush it. I'm just doing my best to be present, right? Like help me to
very good.
Keep staying here and holding on to hope, right? To not give into despair. And I think really needing that, I've needed other women in my life. I've needed other outside to be pouring into me, right? To really like where is my identity rooted? Like, I don't need these other people to be okay for me to be okay, but we want them to be okay, right? Like, it's this, I don't know if it's a battle of the wants versus needs, or our hopes versus reality, you know, in those shoulds and it shouldn't be's.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just so challenging. But I think what I hear, and even just the things that you've been able to share, is just that probably is us as a society, I would imagine, is us maturing in that ability. We're very familiar with grief on a high level and different degrees, but like, it's almost like the Pandora's box. The more we know, the more we need to know, right? Like, the deeper it goes and the layers that there are. And I think a switch that's happened for me too, I think through the years, is the goal is not to eliminate pain. Like,
Right.
the goal is not to, oh, let's resolve this so it never happens again. Right. Like, or it's just like, okay, let me just get stronger at handling it or processing it or being able. And I feel like there has been a lot of victories in that growth, like where those things do happen faster, in the sense of like, it doesn't take me out, right? Like, it's not this big, huge sack, but you're going to keep being handed boulders, right? Like, we're going to be tempted to keep filling that sack back up. And it's an ongoing, like, if we're surrendered that this is life, grief will be continuing to come the rest of our
It will.
lives, right? Like,
Yep.
so any
It will.
thoughts or advice for me on the things I just shared, or
Well,
bad
you're
thinking?
so right, and that is a magical time of incredible clash between, you know, the perimenopause time in your teenagers, and then quite often people have their aging parents on the other side of that. That,
Yeah.
you know, the sandwich generation begins to take place. If not now, then
Yeah.
10 years, and it's excruciating.
Yeah.
It is excruciating, and I think the thing I wanted to make sure I shared is that it's not that it's, you know, wrong to want to comfort and want to counsel when you do have good counsel, because we do need to guide one another, right?
Yeah.
Everyone needs guidance. Leadership is very important. Good leadership, good
Yeah.
mentoring is essential. But and so people, I would hate for people to hear this podcast and think that, oh, okay, I'm just going to, you know, sit in the pit with people and that's all I'm ever going to do. And that's what I should do. I think that's the essential first step. And I would separate out any subsequent conversations from that. I wouldn't try to do anything more than that. When someone's really in pain and they're coming to express pain, that is the appropriate thing to do, is to sit in silence, and maybe, you know, see if they want to share anything,
Yeah.
reassuring them that they don't have to share anything they don't want to share, or that you're not going to go blab and gossip all over the place, but that this is a safe place and you'll keep their confidence, and that's done in a private, safe space too, not in the middle of a crowd. Hey, I heard you were, you know, upset. What happened? You know, I've been guilty of that. But then there is space to come back around and inquire. And this is a skill I've had to learn as well, kind of late in life. I regret that, but come back and ask, you know, and say, you know, I feel like I'd really like to share something. Is that okay? Are you in a place where that would, you know, be welcome? Or no? Because I really want to know, yes or no.
Yeah.
And then even checking as you're engaging, is this okay? Is this helping or no?
Yeah.
And really be open to no. And then you back off and you sit in the pit again for a while, and then you try again another day. You know, if in fact you really do have something to offer, but maybe the best use is to just sit and be nearby.
Yeah. I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it is a confusing space, because
it is very confusing.
Always, like the goal is not, but I think you know, there's the cliche of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, you know, and I think really giving some real structure to that, of like, it really is true. And I think if we can at least first be silent, just be in the moment with them. I love that idea, to just then ask for more. And then being really secure that it's not coming from, I think that's something I've learned a lot this last year is being able to really separate it out of like, it's not about me. It's impacting me, but it's not about me. So how can I do what I need to do to be strong enough to sit with them, strong enough to advise, strong enough to encourage and build up and be a support, to be a strong space as much as I can. But then also remembering that we don't always stay. I mean, I can't say always. There's things that are hard, but most of the time, right? When we're ready, we're going to come out of the trenches, And so I feel like even like, man, the beginning of 2025, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for some fruit. There's been a lot of planting. There's been a lot of persevering and pruning this year. Like it's been one of those really hard years, but feeling like, oh man, like now I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But it's been a year, and people go through longer or shorter. And again, it's not a competition. It's not a comparison.
Nope.
Whatever it needs to be. And I think I have been able to find hope and just knowing that like, man, God is doing something, right? And I don't want to rush it. I don't want to get in the way of it. I don't want to rush it. I don't want to be preventing it because I'm uncomfortable, right? Like, let me I'm not the one that has to do the fixing. But I do want to be the one to support and love, and I want love back, right? There is that, we look not only to our own interests, but to the interest of others. And so how do I wear my own mask while I also help you get your mask on is so valuable. Wow. Well, Dee definitely shared some really great thoughts with us. And some really helpful just analogies and pictures for us to keep maturing in our understanding with grief. And I think even, something that I'm going to take away is just remembering that it doesn't go away. And each experience probably really, it's not one size fits all. And I think even I'm hearing like, it's not even one size fits all for myself, right? Like the same thing could happen next year, but I'm going to be a different person. They're going to be a different person. And so what we need to heal is not the same thing. And how do we be okay with it? Because I think, earlier we were talking about like just we want to control things and we want it to be easy. I think that's part of human nature too. Is like, wouldn't life be easy if there was just a rule book we could follow and there's these clear black and whites.
Yep.
It just isn't. And so how do we just accept the grayness of life and just be quiet long enough to be on the journey?
That's exactly right. There's so much noise and distraction right now in our lives. I really do believe, and that so much of our unwellness in our youth and in ourselves, is the stress from all of this information, stimulation, screens all the time. I mean, it's, and I love, I'm on social media. I love it all. I mean, I love it all. But it is really exhausting. And so the path to our well-being is never going to crash through all of that noise. We are going to have to intentionally have enough sense and skill and, I don't know, maybe input from somebody else to say, there's a path you absolutely must walk, and you're going to have to turn out everything else and still yourself and face the darkness. And then not just sit in it, and wallow in it and keep spinning the same story, but you must walk through it and complete it and process it and forgive it and get rid of the resentment. And it's an action. Actively do that. It won't happen on its own. Time does not help it. Time just numbs it and distances us from it. It's a deceiving thing to think, if I give it enough time, it'll all be better. No, it will not. It will fester in there. So it's worth considering here at the beginning of a new year, how I'm going to, order my life so that I can face and have space for some of the hard things in my life and in other people's lives as well.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Well, Tammy, where can people find you if they want to know more about the grief recovery?
Well, there is a grief recovery method website, thegriefrecoverymethod.com, where you can, if you, search for specialists in Kiev, you'll find me.
Okay.
But there's, you can find me. My email is really easy. It's Tammy, my first name, Tammy, at missionstory.com.
Okay.
Really easy, missionstory.com.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, grief recovery is not the only route, but it's a very good one. It's worth, and what I love about it is there's a start, there's a finish. You don't sit forever in a support group and wonder, when am I good? Am I good? I don't know. Am I good? No, you arrive.
You will know. And then you'll be ready for the next thing, right?
Yeah. And I hope you will experience it one day. It's
oh my
it's great.
goodness. Oh,
thanks so much,
for
Kylie.
your time. That was really great.
Love chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Walls. If this episode inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend and leave a review. Your support helps more women step into their courage and purpose. Ready for more? Subscribe to the podcast and contact me. You can find me at beyondthewallspodcast.com. Reach out for coaching, more resources, and all the support you could need. Remember, breaking through the walls is just the beginning. Your best life is waiting.